Hi, welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. Today we're going to be a little bit aggressive in our topic selection. We're talking about why consulting the Bible for modern marriage can be confusing and misleading. And so let me get into this. My goal today is very simply to forward assist the internalizing of your locus of authority with regard to marriage and relationships. I'm an Army officer retiree. And on our M16, we had something called a forward assist. So after you pulled the charging handle back and loaded your weapon, loaded the first round out of the magazine in your weapon, you could hit a forward assist to make sure that the bullet was seated correctly, the round was seated correctly. And so one of the ways we measure someone's stages of growth, or one way you can assess your own stage of growth or any stage of growth, is by assessing where your locus of authority is. Are we looking to external sources, or are we looking to support ourselves? I have another video called The Insecurity of Growth. And the more you grow, the more insecure it can be, the more insecure it can feel. Sort of like when you're a child, it seems like somebody's got everything. Somebody's got the bills, you've got a roof over your head, they've got the insurance, there's food on the table, and you don't have to think about where that stuff's coming from. And as you get a little bit older, and you start to realize that pretty soon you're going to be relied upon for all of that kind of stuff, it can be daunting and it can feel insecure. Well, something very similar goes on spiritually. There's a scene in the original Superman movie with Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder as Lois Lane where she's falling off a building out of a helicopter and Superman saves her. And then he says, "Don't worry, I've got you." And she says, "You've got me. Who's got you?" So one of the things with spiritual growth is to be the person that no one's got you. You've got you. You've got you. And having that internalized locus of authority. Now, the way the Bible words this is having the laws of God written on your heart. Okay, and there's a few other phrases that it uses too in 1 Corinthians 6 and 1 Corinthians 10. All things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. All things are lawful, but all things edify not, or I will not be brought under the power of any. And so you go from this shift from having like the 10 Commandments in Exodus to going to Ecclesiastes 3 where there's a time for this and there's a time for that, to going to something like the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5 where there's a different kind of guidance altogether. So you go from guidance to direct commands to understanding when different things are appropriate, and then we shift completely over toward optimizing for different values and virtues. And that becomes the moral basis of what it is that you're going to do rather than any specific commands. So the more your locus of authority internalizes, that tends to correspond with maturity in general as a human and spiritual maturity if you are on some kind of spiritual path. So I'm trying to use a specific issue today to try to give you a forward assist on this. Now we're talking about marriage and why consulting the Bible for marriage can be confusing and misleading. Okay. Now, I got to tell you for sure what I'm not trying to say, because this topic can be very misleading, and there's a high propensity for somebody to misunderstand what we are getting at here. So I need you to listen very carefully, especially if you're going to. I don't mind constructive criticism, but if you're going to offer a critical response, I need you to listen very carefully and respond to what I'm actually saying as opposed to what you think I'm saying, because those two can be very, very different. And as a person who speaks publicly a lot, that happens a lot. Okay, so don't be that guy. We are not trying to say that there is zero benefit from consulting the Bible for any issues or for all issues of life. We're not trying to say that at all. Any student of biblical interpretation knows that there are some matters that can be considered for direct application and some matters for which we have principles, but where direct application is not relevant at all. For example, we would not directly apply the directives given to Noah for how to build an ark. All right? Now, you wouldn't go out and when you read that story, it doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean that there aren't things to learn and apply from it, but we're not going to directly apply it because we're not going to actually go out in our own backyard and build an ark. Now, somebody did. I think the Answers in Genesis people actually did, but not for that reason. They did it for illustrative purposes. So we wouldn't directly apply that. A direct application is to follow that directive, but we easily recognize, oh, that directive was for Noah at that time in that circumstance. I am not at that time or in that circumstance, so I don't need to go build an ark. Lots of things in the Bible that way. So nor are we going to stone adulterers or blasphemers. We don't have problems with garments of diverse sorts. You know, you have rayon, cotton, polyester blends. We don't have a problem with that. Couldn't do that in the Old Testament. We eat shrimp and pork. We aren't trying to sacrifice our oldest child, and our medical doctors don't think that women with longer hair are more fertile due to semen absorbency of long hair, which was a thing that could apply to some of the lingo that we find in 1 Corinthians 11 about whether or not women should have long hair. They thought it pertained to fertility back then. We know better than that now. You wouldn't expect to find a blueprint in Scripture for how to build a highway bridge system that can handle rush hour traffic in Houston. Nor would you consult Scripture for when to change your spark plugs or advice on locking valve stems. There are just certain things that we don't expect to find in Scripture because common sense, because society, culture, technology, and the legal system are so different now that we don't expect to get relevant data on such matters from Scripture, though we might find principles that could apply. Okay, that's a different thing. So I'm not saying there are no principles that apply to modern day marriage. What I'm going to propose today is that what we call marriage today is so different from what the Bible has in mind when it uses the word marriage that we should consider it with the same grain of salt that we would for any of the matters that I listed above. Like it's two different words, like it's two different things, okay? So stick with me to the end, hear everything that I have to say, and then carry that forward with it. I want you to leave this video just being persuaded of what I'm trying to say here. This is going to have to work on you for a while, and you'll find yourself thinking along these terms in other domains as well. So my base proposals are this. What the Bible calls marriage does not exist today. What we call marriage is never addressed in the Bible. The Bible's principles are useful in modern relationships. Hear me? Direct application of biblical marital guidance was for situations and arrangements that do not exist in our society. Getting direct application instead of principle application from the Bible with regard to modern pair bonding relationships will cause more problems than it will solve. Can't tell you how many times people come to me and they're like, "Oh, do I have biblical grounds for divorce right here?" Well, what you're calling marriage isn't the same thing the Bible calls marriage, and what you're calling divorce isn't the same thing the Bible's calling divorce. So why are you asking that question? Okay. So let's put our thinking caps on. What I find most disturbing is people who go verse hunting in order to figure out which possible options are justifiable in the eyes of God, like Hebraic Megazeus up there somewhere, in accordance with his revealed word. This sounds moral and virtuous to many naive people, but it can be just as objectifying to the other person as any obscene or exploitative endeavor, such as porn or OnlyFans or anything like that. This results in a relational disconnect where instead of partners relating to each other, genuinely they resort to evoking proxy authorities. Instead of relating to each other genuinely, they resort to evoking proxy authorities to intervene where their relational skills fall short. This is very reductionistic, and it does not meet the complexity of contemporary situations with a commensurate level of personal and interactive skill. Nothing you find in the Bible, regardless of how strong your opinion is, for example, listen to me, can stop your partner from leaving or divorcing you, no matter what you think about any Bible verse. Nothing you find in the Bible, there's no strong enough opinion that you can have about any verse in the Bible that can protect your finances. There's no strong opinion about a verse you have in the Bible that can protect your relationship with your kids, that can stop the legal system from eating you for lunch, that can teach you how to deal with mental disorders, that can educate your children, that can stop your kids from being mentally ill. There's no strong, virtuous, morally held opinion about any Bible verse that can do any of that. You have to understand that, okay? Running to the Bible the same way a little kid runs and tags on the mother's skirt isn't going to protect you from the environment in which you find yourself. Okay? Young men and women need to develop an internal locus of authority, so you know what you're getting into when it comes to relationships. Develop competency in risk analysis, develop competency in cost-benefit analysis, develop competency in interpersonal dynamics, especially since all interactions are elective today, which they were not in Scripture. It's a very big deal. I have one of the videos that I want to do soon is that, well, I just forgot which one I was about to mention because I have a long list of them. But one of them is that, here it is. It's that if you're going to have a relationship as an adult today, you kind of have to have some kind of expertise in psychology. You need to know how people work. I'm not saying you need to be a psychologist, but you kind of need to be an amateur psychologist. Bear in mind all the things that you don't know, but you need to put some effort, read some books, watch some videos, learn a little bit about how people work so that you know what you're dealing with. There are no default structural scaffolding social structures that you can just plug people into that automatically makes everything going to work perfectly, okay? You actually have to know what you're dealing with. I was counseling a couple recently, and I was trying to explain to them some of the skills that they need to develop and some of the books they need to read and videos they need to watch in order to help develop those skills and some of the things they need to do for months or maybe at least a couple of years in order to reach some kind of relational equilibrium. And they're like, well, if it takes that much effort, it's not worth it. The problem with that attitude is that if the effort isn't worth it for that relationship, there is no relationship today that doesn't require that. Now, you might get really lucky with partner selection at some point, but even with really good partner selection, you have to really bring all your skill sets to the table with regard to dealing with difficult issues, especially if you're both going to be honest and relate honestly, because that's not as straightforward as people pretend that it is. So we're going to compare marriage in the first century with marriage, when the Bible was written, okay, my Bible's over there now. When the Bible was written, marriage in the first century is very different than what we are calling marriage today. It's so different that I don't think we should be using the same word for it. It's a completely different thing. I'm going to give you some different word examples right now that mean completely different things depending on the context in which they are found. Like the word pupil, the word tablet, the word scroll, the word cloud, the word stream, the word profile. Now you can double click on these, or you can zoom in on these or screenshot and read these. But all of these words mean something different depending on the context in which they're found. I mean, very different, completely different. Even though they sound the same, they look the same, they're spelled the same. The word virus, the word host, the word battery, the word train, the word drone, the word mouse, the word cell, the word post, the word key. And my argument is that the marriage that we use today is as different from the marriage of the first century as the word pupil is as a student to part of your eye. It's a completely different kind of thing, okay? So the domains of consideration that we're going to look at in just a second are legal and social structure, gender roles and autonomy, reproductive knowledge and control, economics and social survival, psychological and cultural meaning, and religious and cultural framing. By the way, if you like the stuff that you're getting on this channel, we invite you to support the channel. We could not do this without you. Everything you get here is user supported. And thanks to the people who have supported the channel for the ability to bring this still for free to everybody else who benefits from it. Somebody recently donated and they commented, thanks for this channel. It has changed my life. And so I think that we're doing a lot of good here. And if you want to contribute to that and help enable us to put out more and more content and maybe even take this as a full-time endeavor one day, that's how to do so. So thanks for that. You can also follow us on Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter. And remember to subscribe to this channel and share these. Hit the bell icon so you're notified. Hit the thumbs up too, because that helps YouTube suggest our videos for more viewers and helps the channel grow. And then the impact that we're having. Also, if you would like a one-on-one session with me, yours truly, you can schedule a paid one-on-one consultation by going to the homepage at beyondthefundamentals.com. Scroll down to where it says book a one-on-one consultation. And in that one-on-one consultation, after we schedule it, we will take all the domain fluencies that we've built up over the years on this channel, and we will apply them to your situation. So if that is interesting to you, that is available to you. Okay, so there's a paid one-on-one consultation that's available to you if that's what you would like. So back to our domains of consideration. Let's start going through these one at a time. Let's look at legal and structural. And on the left-hand side, we're comparing the first century, and then on the right-hand side, we're comparing contemporary U.S. marriages. So in the first century, marriage was often a legal contract between families. Today in the U.S., and by the way, I know that there are still some tribal places and things like that. I'm talking about industrialized Western society where I find myself, like in the United States, okay? Today in the U.S., contemporary marriage is primarily personal, emotional decision between individuals. So those are very different. In the past, it was arranged by parents, elders with strategic, social, or economic motives. Today, it's elective love marriages chosen by the individuals involved. In the first century, women were legally the property of their father and then the husband. Today, women have equal legal personhood rights within the marriage. In the past, in the first century, a woman was often transferred with a dowry or a bride price. Today, dowries are obsolete. Financial expectations are mutual or absent. Back in the past, polygyny. That's men with many wives. Polygamy is anybody having multiple spouses. Polygyny is men having multiple wives. Polyandry is a woman having multiple husbands. Polygyny was socially acceptable in some cultures. Today, monogamy is a legal and cultural norm in the United States. In the first century, legal power was overwhelmingly male. Women had little to no legal recourse, and legal rights in marriage are symmetrical today, like with property, divorce, property rights and custody, things like that. And I know you can make an argument that they're not symmetrical, but it's certainly not like it was. In the first century, marriages could be used to secure political alliances or social status, but today marriage is generally about personal fulfillment and companionship. So all these things are very different. Now that's legal and social structure. If we look at gender roles and autonomy, in the first century versus today. In the first century, when women married at puberty or very shortly thereafter, 13, 14, 15, right around there. Today, the average age of the first marriage is around 28 to 30 for women. In the first century, women were expected to bear children immediately. Today, reproduction is optional and planned. In the first century, female virginity was a prerequisite and heavily policed. Today, female sexual history is not legally or socially determinative in any way. In the first century, women were not permitted to initiate divorce in many cultures. Today, women can freely initiate divorce and retain custody and property. So it's very different today than the way things were in the past. In the past, economic dependence on men was total. Today, women can earn their own property and live independently. So one of the reasons it would be so bad for a man to divorce a woman in the past is because he was her livelihood. The Bible has a lot to say about dealing with widows, because a woman without a husband was a real economic problem for her, a very big economic problem. And of course, you don't want people turning to morally inappropriate things in order to support themselves. But there wasn't a whole lot that they could do in that culture, and it's very different today. Like when I met my wife, she had her own house, she had her own place, she has her own career, she's a professional, she has her own agency in the world. And quite frankly, without me around, she would do just fine. She does not need me economically. I do not need her. And so in the first century, if you take somebody on, then you just decide to divorce them. It's almost like banishing somebody from the tribe, which is a sort of death sentence, if you will. Okay. Yep. So it's very different today. In the first century, childbearing and domestic duties were the primary role. Today, women balance careers, education, and family, and may forego childbearing altogether. Very different. Now let's talk about reproductive knowledge and control. This matters, especially if you've seen some of our, I don't know if I've done these videos yet. Yeah, I have. I've done some videos on the development of relationships over time with the invention of the plow and the agrarian culture and all this kind of stuff, and how that affects what was considered relationships. Okay. So paternal certainty, the invention of the tractor and inheritance rights, all these kinds of things. The first century AD marriage, in the first century, there was no understanding of ovulation or conception. I mean, they literally thought that the longer a woman's hair was, the more likely she was to get married, because the longer hair would absorb the semen better. They literally thought that. Today, that we have an advanced understanding of reproductive biology, not only in our own species, but in general with plants and animals and everything else. At the time, they had no contraceptives beyond superstition or withdrawal, there is an account of that in the Bible. Today, people have wide access to birth control and abortion. And you might not agree with one of those, but they still have wide access to them. It's still a thing. In the first century, pregnancy was inevitable in sexual relations. And today, reproductive autonomy is protected by law and medicine and other means. In the past, no paternity tests. Trust and control were mechanisms for certainty. So if you really need to have paternal certainty so that you can make sure it's your son or your heir that inherits the property and the land, well, you don't really have DNA paternity tests to make sure it's your son. Today, we have DNA testing that provides certainty of biological paternity for whatever reason you might need that. In the past, female chastity was tied to inheritance and legitimacy. Today, legal paternity and legitimacy can be established independently of marriage. Those are some differences. In the past, looking at the topic of economics and social survival, first century women were economically disenfranchised, and marriage was basically survival for them. Going from dad to a husband, that was the economy of women in the day. Today, women can earn, save, invest, and retire independently. First century, marriage was an economic necessity, especially for women. Today, marriage is more about emotional fulfillment or lifestyle choice. In the past, property and inheritance passed through the male line. Today, equal inheritance laws and joint property ownership. In the first century, there was no social safety nets. Widows and divorced women could face destitution. And today, welfare systems, employment, and legal protections enable self-sufficiency. In the past, looking at psychological and cultural meaning in this category, in the first century, marriage was a social obligation, not a romantic ideal. Today, marriage is viewed as a culmination of a romantic love. By the way, romantic love, romance as we know it, didn't exist until about the 1200s or so, after the Cathars were persecuted by the Roman Catholics. And we had to do another video on that. But romance, as we know it, didn't exist back then, like we know it today. And also, elective love marriages didn't. That's like the last 200 years is the only time that we've been doing that. That's relatively new on the scene. Not to mention today, everything's so different with dating apps and everything else. Things are changing very rapidly. Now, all of us were born into a time where there are elective love marriages going on, but in the grand scope of humanity, it is a relatively new phenomenon, okay? And there are no ancient holy books that address this kind of thing, okay? Especially by and large. In the first century, love could develop after marriage, if at all. Like in the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Do you love me? All right. They're married whether they love each other or not. Today, love is usually a prerequisite for marriage, or limerence at least. In the first century, the concept of individual fulfillment or happiness in marriage was absent. Today, personal growth, compatibility are core to the modern marriage ideal. In the first century, marriage roles were fixed and hierarchical. Today, marriage roles are negotiated and fluid. You can negotiate your relationship to be however you want it. You can customize it however you want, and there's nothing stopping you. In the first century, marriages were often enduring despite misery due to lack of exit options. And today, marriages are frequently dissolved if emotional needs aren't met, or if other kinds of needs aren't met, or especially if something terrible is happening. Somebody could be exploiting the kids, or there's all kinds of bad things that could be happening, all kinds of good reasons to leave somebody. Religious and cultural framing. In the first century is strongly tied to patriarchal religious mandates. And remember, in Israel, they are a theocracy. Today, we have a secular form of government. There is no theology or religious dogma that is mandated by our systems of government these days in the industrial Western world. But in the first century, not only were they everybody in Israel was of a particular religion, of Judaism, but it was a theocracy. So it wasn't just religion and then there's civil law separated like that. It all came together. Religious and civil law all came together, and criminal law all came together as part of the religion. Now, today we have people practicing like Sharia law over in Muslim areas, and that's a similar kind of thing where they have the religion, the civil law, the moral law, the criminal law all tied into one religious overstructure. Okay, and it was a similar kind of thing. We don't live that way today. We don't live in that kind of society. Today we have increasingly secularized or individually defined mandates with regard to these kinds of things. In the first century, it was viewed as a duty to family, to tribe, and to God. And now it's viewed as a choice or a personal milestone. It's not like that. It's not like it was. In the first century is often tied to ethnic or tribal boundaries. Today, they frequently cross cultural and interracial boundaries. Okay, you think nothing of it. You see all kinds of things, in relationships with each other, all kinds of different ethnicities and genders and ages. There's all kinds of different things that people got going on these days. And by the way, the very fact that some things are now called marriage, which don't meet the definition of the word, should tell us that the word marriage today does not mean what marriage meant years ago. And I'm not saying that we should make it like it was, especially with all these other things going on. I mean, do you really want to marry barely post-pubescent girls as property when they're barely literate and they have no autonomy in the matter? I don't think you want to restore that. I don't want to restore that. Doesn't sound like any fun to me. In the first century, honor and shame were public markers of marital conduct, and today we have privacy and autonomy. Privacy and autonomy dominate modern expectations. So those are some comparative differences that are very worth considering, making first century marriage and today marriage very, very different. Now I'm going to say a phrase here which may sound terrible or crazy, but I need to shock you away from the old way of thinking. First century marriage compared to today, first century marriage has more in common with pet ownership today than it has in common with marriage as we know it today. When you think of the things as property, they serve a certain role, they have a certain place, they don't have any autonomy. It genuinely, and that's a terrible thing to say, but there's a lot of terrible things that happened in the past. But marriage in the past has more in common with pet ownership than it has in common with what we call marriage today. And I don't think we should be using the same word to talk about these two very different things at all. The Bible speaks to a fundamentally different institution. So the premise here, the word marriage today refers to something categorically different from what it referred to in biblical times. In the Bible, marriage was a social economic transaction between families. Women were transferred as property or economic liabilities to be managed. Today, marriage is framed as an egalitarian emotional partnership based on mutual choice, love, and personal fulfillment. To seek guidance in the Bible for modern marriage is like consulting a chariot manual to fix a Tesla. The word may be the same, but the substance is not. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't principles in the Bible that can apply. Remember what I said earlier. But when the Bible speaks directly to what should and shouldn't happen specifically within the confines of what it calls marriage, that is not what's happening today. That's not what we have today. Matter of fact, when I got married, we didn't do it in a church we went straight to a courthouse. There was nothing about God or church or covenants or any of that kind of stuff having anything to do with it. It's just a legal piece of paper. So it's a very different concept these days. Biblical framework presumes patriarchal authority and female subordination. Biblical marriage presumed male headship, female submission, and no real agency for the women. Divorce laws in Deuteronomy, Levitical purity codes, and narratives around polygyny all reflect a time when women had no say in marital formation or dissolution. Attempting to extract ethical norms from that system for today leads to misapplication or retroactive justifications for inequality. Using that lens today can rationalize abuse, diminish women's autonomy, or confuse power imbalance with spiritual order. Modern realities have rendered the biblical concerns obsolete when we talk about direct application, not the principles involved overall from what we get from general spiritual guidance. The core concern around ancient agrarian marriage, paternal certainty, and lineage purity has been solved with DNA testing and legal reform. And I would say that even even though you could argue that some of the strict rules around marriage were having to do with paternal certainty and lineage purity, there's also like an ego ownership component of the man. Like, that's my woman, like you own a person. You don't own people. Okay. The fear of adultery, often related to inheritance rights, not really romantic betrayal, those structures no longer govern modern relationships. Reproductive control, birth control, IVF, etc., and economic independence for women have transformed relational dynamics in ways the Bible does not address or even imagine. Psychological and relational science has replaced ancient norms. We now understand attachment theory, trauma cycles, communication styles, conflict resolution, and mental health, none of which were accessible in biblical texts. Now, I do think that Solomon's advice to seek out all things under the sun, I do think that we are supposed to study these things. I think that there is the intent. I don't think the intent in the Bible is to follow the way things were at the time. I think the intent at the Bible is to develop wisdom so that we can learn how to navigate the circumstance in which we find ourselves. Okay? So I'm not advocating going against the Bible. I'm advocating being in alignment with what its actual intent was. Okay? We have the same problem when it comes to the Constitution. Some people, they hate the founding of America because they say, well, the Constitution made slavery, legal. And what you don't know the rest of the story is that none of the founders wanted slavery to be legal. They wanted it to be outlawed in the Constitution, but they couldn't get Georgia and South Carolina to sign on to the Constitution and to join them in the fight against the Brits if they put that in the Constitution. So they figured it was a baby step. Our ultimate intent is to end slavery, but one step at a time. This is our first step toward ending slavery. Let's win this fight first, and then we'll fight this fight next. That kind of thing. And I think there's some things in Scripture that are similar to that, where the overall intent isn't to get you to replicate the way things were at that time. It's for you to develop wisdom so that you can behave in the most wise way in the circumstance in which you find yourself in relation to the goal or aim, that the mark that you're pressing toward, in a Philippians 3:14 kind of way. What helps couples today are therapeutic models, not tribal laws or epistles written in the context of Roman slavery, patriarchal honor codes, or clan-based societies. Modern relational wisdom arises from data, experience, and evolving ethics, not static cultural codes from 2,000 years ago. And experience right there from Romans chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. Experience is very important. Biblical marriages were often morally reprehensible by today's standards. Like Abraham married his half-sister. Jacob married 2 sisters. David and Solomon had hundreds of wives and concubines. Wives were raped and sold and traded. These were not moral failings within a healthy marriage paradigm. They were normative expressions of the marital structure of the time. So to seek direct application from these texts is to try to distill ethical gold from a morally bankrupt raw ore. So we're not supposed to mimic what we see going on at the time, but you have to bear in mind when the Bible talks about marriage that those kinds of things are considered the norm. They are not the norm today. I think things are so different we shouldn't be using the same word to describe the two things. The Bible offers no model of marriage that reflects today's ideal. The Bible does not feature even one clearly articulated monogamous, mutual, romantic, emotionally healthy marriage that matches modern expectations. I mean, you could say, well, Peter had a wife, but we don't know anything about that relationship. And we certainly don't know enough to say that it was different from what the norm was at the time. Jesus was married. Paul explicitly discouraged marriage in 1 Corinthians 7. Many or most biblical characters had arranged polygynous or utilitarian marriages. There is no model couple in the Bible that you would present today as the ideal or aspiration for a healthy relationship. Like Isaac takes Rebekah into his tent, and then they're considered married. Today our Christian churches would frown if you did that. They would not like you to do that. So the conclusion of that section, because we have a little more that I'm going to give you some closing remarks here in a minute. Misleading continuity breeds harm. Using the Bible to define modern marriage creates a false continuity that reinforces values that no longer apply, that delegitimizes modern needs like emotional compatibility, mental health, personal freedom, and it encourages spiritual guilt for problems that are better addressed by modern technology, relational wisdom. To consult the Bible for direct guidance on modern marriage is not only unhelpful, it's epistemologically confused. It conflates two different social technologies under one word, and in doing so, often obscures the path toward genuine relational health. And something else that I want to say, there's another video that I have coming out called If You Are Religiously Ideologically Possessed, You Are Not Married to Your Spouse. You're married to a set of ideas. We'll do that video in a different time. We're not going to talk about it here. So if you're going to the Bible to try to make your spouse behave in a certain way because the Bible says so, you are not in a relationship, and the person you're in a relationship with is not them. You're in a relationship with a system, okay? So, what are some alternative relationship labels? And this, I'm not saying we should apply any of these, just to give an example. Some people have things called life partnerships. Some people have personal covenant, a relational alliance, an intentional union, a bondship. You might call it a shared life agreement, or a co-authoring union, or growth partnership, or adaptive pairing, or sovereign pairing, or conscious union, or voluntary devotion, or affinity pact, or love accord. I mean, there's all kinds. Let's imagine you live in a society where they say, oh, we don't have marriage anymore, we have this. And they give you any of these terms. We have shared life agreements. We don't have, or we have conscious union agreements or sovereign pairing arrangements. We don't have marriage. And so if that were the case, I think it would wake some people up to where, they would realize, the Bible doesn't say anything about sovereign pairing. It's just got all this stuff in there about marriage. You see? You see what I'm saying? I think if the terminology were different, it would be a lot easier for us to realize that the technologies are different. And back a couple slides ago when it's talking about technologies, that includes psychotechnologies, okay? If you don't know what a psychotechnology is, psychotechnologies are things like language, literacy, numeracy, the ability to do math, the ability to read. Those are psychotechnologies, having your brain do something that gives you more advanced capabilities, especially when compared to the animal world. Are we tracking so far? Now I have a few before the closing remarks. We use the word marriage today, but that is not the same as marriage found in Scripture. We use words related to marriage today, such as divorce, husband, wife, all these kinds of things, but none of those terms are addressing the relational structures that we have in our society today. They might as well be different terms that are no longer used. So when somebody comes up to me and they're like, "Hey, Kevin, do I have a biblical grounds for, justificate? Do I have a biblical justification for divorce in this case?" Well, first of all, the marriage today isn't the marriage then. The word divorce today isn't the same as divorce then. Wife and husband today doesn't mean wife and husband then. So why do you even ask me that? So that kind of thing. I hope you can understand by now that it's a very different thing. Now I have 4 slides worth of closing remarks that I want to share with you, and then this video will be complete. And they are as follows. In modern society, the institution of marriage exists within an intricate and evolving matrix of laws, economic structures, cultural norms, psychological expectations, and technological realities that bear little resemblance to the world of the first century. Given this, it's not only reasonable, but imperative to evaluate relationship commitments, especially marriage, through the lens of risk analysis and cost-benefit evaluation grounded in present-day circumstances. Legal frameworks today, for example, radically differ from ancient tribal or Roman law. Modern Western legal systems define marriage as a contract with significant economic and custodial liabilities. In jurisdictions like the United States, the consequences of divorce, custody battles, alimony, and asset division are real, measurable risks that cannot be adequately mitigated by simply appealing to moral teachings from a vastly different legal era. Economically, both partners are now expected to maintain individual earning potential, manage debt, and plan for long-term financial stability in ways that simply did not exist in subsistence agrarian contexts. in subsistence agrarian contexts. To ignore this reality in favor of ancient prescriptions is to pretend that post-industrial capitalism, dual income expectations, and career mobility do not exist. Culturally, the idea of lifelong romantic love, emotional fulfillment, and personal growth within marriage is a modern invention. Ancient texts were not written to support egalitarian partnerships based on mutual psychological development. They were written to maintain kinship structures, male property rights, and social continuity. Using them uncritically as templates for modern partnership ignores the dramatic redefinition of marriage as a space for shared emotional labor, individuation, and consent-based interdependence. From a risk analysis standpoint, this means that marriage today carries massively different potential downsides, including loss of assets, exposure to litigation, psychological harm, and entanglement in state systems that ancient writers could not have even imagined. Failing to assess these risks on their own terms is not virtuous, it is negligent. You hear me out there? I'm going to read that again. Failing to assess these risks on their own terms, on your own terms, in your own situation. It's not virtuous to ignore all these realities and run to a moral code. It's negligent. Furthermore, religious texts, while often profound in symbolic or moral insight, were written for audiences whose marital or material, legal, and cosmological contexts differ so dramatically from ours that many of their prescriptions become non-transferable without severe distortion. To outsource modern decisions to ancient documents is to flatten context, ignoring the uniquely complex web of factors that define our actual lives. That's why context is key. Context matters. Context is everything. And the last of our closing remarks, in short, if wisdom is the capacity to navigate reality effectively, then modern marriage requires the wisdom to analyze real risks, calculate real costs, and weigh real benefits. Not to adopt fixed rules from a time before the emergence of constitutional law, gender equality, neuropsychology, or global economics. This isn't moral relativism. It's reality literacy. So when this issue comes up and you're facing issues of marriage and divorce and husband and wife and what are our roles and all this sort of stuff, I want you to do the thought experiment of swapping out all of the terms that we use for some other kind of terms, like the terms that we looked at on these slides. Swap out marriage for that. Swap out the word divorce for that. Swap out the word husband for something else. Swap out the word wife for something else. And that will help shift your mind into thinking in a way that is more in alignment with today's reality, that just because those same words are used in the Bible, which we all know and love and use as our source of inspiration, doesn't mean that the structure is analogous or that the specific rules with regard to it are relevant in any way at all. Okay? If you like what you're getting here, remember to support the channel financially. You can go to www.beyondthefundamentals.com. We're getting some good momentum. I sent out a support letter to people who have emailed us recently. We've got a good response from that. So very much appreciate that. And we want that momentum to continue. If you want to schedule a one-on-one consultation with me, you can do so by going to beyondthefundamentals.com and scroll down to book a one-on-one consultation, and you can schedule a paid one-on-one consultation with yours truly, where we can take all of the domains in which we've built literacy on these channels over the past few years, and we can apply them to your specific situation. In the meanwhile, I hope that you enjoyed this video on why consulting the Bible for modern marriage can be confusing and misleading. From here forward, just think about what we talked about. Just think about it as you go, and maybe apply it to other things that you think the Bible talks about, which it might cause you to think a little bit differently and exercise a little bit of wisdom. I'm not saying don't consult the Bible. I'm not saying that the Bible is wrong or that it has any kind of thing that we shouldn't do. It's not like that. The principles in the Bible are good principles, but the specifics are sometimes for a time in the past that don't apply today. And we have to study the context to know what applies today and how it applies today. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.